Okay guys, I swear this is not going to become an American movie review channel. But it just so happens there's another movie coming out that I think the people who watch this channel might be interested in. It is not Japanese, but it is set in Japan, and I think it does some pretty interesting things, and it's pretty entertaining as well. And the movie I'm talking about today is Isle of Dogs. It's a stop-motion animated film by Wes Anderson. I know that several years ago I saw Fantastic Mr. Fox, which was another stop-motion animation also done by Wes Anderson. And I saw it once or twice, but honestly I don't really remember it. I guess it just wasn't that memorable for me. So I'm not going to compare Isle of Dogs to it. I'm just going to be looking at this newer film on its own merits. I did see the plot synopsis of the movie before I went into it, and that really did not sell me on the film. I was not really expecting to enjoy it that much, and the only reason I actually went to see it was because I got a free screening. But it actually ended up being much more fun than I was expecting. And I'd say mostly it comes down to the presentation of it. There's often this very rhythmic music in the background, and it's animated in time to this, so it ends up having this very snappy rhythm. There's a lot of serious scenes in the movie, and the plot is kind of dark, and this sort of snappiness makes it end up being a lot more funny. Like I said, it's set in Japan, and in the story, cat lovers have started to outnumber dog lovers. So when the cat lovers finally have an excuse to get rid of all the dogs, they ship them off to this island that doubles as a garbage dump. So the dogs are all living there for a while, and then a human boy comes to the island to find his dog. And of course, the movie ends up with all the dogs trying to escape the island. My one thought though was that it's kind of like Chicken Run, but with dogs. That's one movie I could compare it to. Now, the choice to set it in Japan is really interesting. They could have actually chosen any country that doesn't speak English to get the same effect, and it would be interesting to kind of analyze why they set it in Japan specifically, but I'm not going to bother with that today. But this choice allowed them to do something very interesting. So this is an American movie for American audiences, presumably. So the dogs all speak English, but the humans speak Japanese. And most of the time, it is not translated. So the idea, I think, is that the viewer sees things from the perspective of the dogs. Because in real life, dogs don't really understand what we humans say, other than maybe, the tone and maybe some specific words. So if you're making a film, how do you make it so the audience can have the same experience that dogs do? Well, let's have the humans speak a language that the audience presumably can't understand. And aside from an occasional loan word, I expect most English speakers aren't going to understand what the human characters say. So basically, we're in the same boat that the dogs are in. Of course, if you can understand Japanese, which some of you on this channel might, it won't have quite the same effect, but it was an interesting production choice to make. Now, despite that, they actually do translate the Japanese a little bit. If there's something the audience absolutely needs to understand to follow the plot, then we'll either hear an interpreter speaking, or some of the text will have an English version of the text, or it might be something that's said by the American foreign exchange student who is one of the characters. But there's a lot of interactions between the human boy and the dogs that travel with him. And when he talks to the dogs, they can't understand him, and neither can I. And that's how it's meant to be. So that was really interesting to let the audience have the dog's perspective. The one thing in the whole movie that I was not sure about was the earpiece that the dog Spots was supposed to wear. I wasn't sure if it was supposed to be a regular ear mic, so he could hear the boy from a distance, or if it was actually some sort of human to dog translation device. And if it was a translator, did it work both ways or just one way? I wasn't clear about that, and I suppose I would like to get clarification on that at some point. There really isn't a main character, which was interesting. At first I thought it was going to be the brown dog, but then it kind of changes over to another dog, and then there's the boy, but then there's also the American girl who becomes important. So there's this assortment of characters, and for this type of movie, it ended up working, and it didn't feel wrong, and I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything. Now, since this is a stop motion animation, which is an extremely painstaking type of animation, especially if you have a lot of detail happening, I have to give it some huge props here. Compared to, say, Kubo and the Two Strings, which was another stop motion animation set in Japan, which I only saw once in theaters a couple of years ago, so I don't really remember it too clearly. This one felt like it had a lot more detail. It felt a lot more gritty. Maybe it's because we're talking about characters who live on a literal island of trash, so, there's going to be dirt and gross stuff around. But even outside of those settings, just the very opening scene, it's this temple that we open on. And we see this set with all these little details, and it was just this very overwhelming feeling of, wow, it's so detailed. And it really has this very impressive effect. And the thing that was probably the most impressive is the dog fur. Most of the dogs have kind of long or tufty fur, and it's made of actual hairs. It's not a solid material like plastic or wax or whatever they make models out of these days. And most of the time the dogs are outdoors, so anytime a breeze comes by, their fur rustles, and little bits will stick up here and there. And it's this amazing little bit of detail. It just looks good, and that really, really helps sell me on the attention to detail this animation has. And of course, I also have to give credit to how they depict the dogs overall. I wouldn't consider myself a dog person, but I always love it when an animation or comic captures the personality of an animal really well. And dogs have a very distinct type of personality. And this film did a really good job showing the little mannerisms and behaviors and the kind of things real dogs respond to, and depicting them in a way that's very realistic, despite the fact that there's no real dogs involved. They did a really good job here. So if you're a dog lover or just an animal lover, I'm sure you will really, really enjoy it. Overall, I would say the movie is kid-friendly. Not super young kids, I'd say maybe at least 7 and up. You do have to be able to read to understand some of the plot points, unless, you're an adult and you want to whisper into your kids' ears every time some text pops up on screen. There are some dark themes, as there is in any good movie. For instance, there's this case where a dog who got stuck in its cage ended up dying of starvation, and we see its skeleton, which is very sad. A guy gets poisoned, and everybody calls it they talk about killing lots of dogs in mass. And not so much dark as it is gory. There's also this surgical operation scene that the camera stays on for a very long time. I think it's at least 15 seconds. It feels really long. And we see the organs being cut out, and it didn't really bother me personally, but I know that there are some people who get kind of squeamish around bloody surgical types of scenes, so just letting you know. Oh, and less bloody, the kid goes through some rough stuff. He gets hit on the head, and it ends up bleeding, and he gets quote-unquote kidnapped at some point, and I think they taser him in the process. It was a rather violent kidnapping scene, which was pretty intense. But despite some of the darker themes, it just overall has this very warm, humorous feeling. Like I said, it has this snappy rhythm that gives it this lighthearted mood, in spite of all the grim subject matter. Just as you're watching it, you just kind of want to keep grinning and giggling over and over again. And I think that's the real draw and the charm of this movie. This warmth leaves you eager to anticipate something entertaining coming up next. It's got this contrast of this warmth and funniness up against these very, sometimes dingy or severe settings. So I definitely recommend this if either you love dogs, you love animals, you love stop motion animation with lots of beautiful detail, or you just like movies with a humorous mood to them. I'd give it a 4, maybe 4.3 out of 5 stars. And I will end my review there. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to support me while my channel is demonetized, you can send me a tip on RitScrib. Link and instructions on how you can do that are in the description. And I will, or may, see you next time.